Dear friend, if you're a regular listener to the show, you'll know that I've been off the grid for the last 2 weeks. I decided to take the advice of my last two guests and take a pause and a digital detox. We've been on holiday to Vancouver, went whale spotting, went to the top of Mount Whistler, partied hard at my niece's wedding, and now I'm back feeling completely refreshed. Whilst I was away, however, the UK seemed to have gone into a complete meltdown with protests and riots from the far right. And in dark times, we need to be tolerant and try to build a deeper understanding for why people behave the way they do. So in today's episode, I have the world-famous investigative journalist Jamie Bartlett. He's the author of books such as The Dark Net, Radicals Chasing Utopia, The People vs. Tech, and co-wrote and presented the BBC podcast series The Missing Crypto Queen, which investigated the disappearance of Dr. Ruja Ignatova, founder of the fake cryptocurrency OneCoin.
From the city of Peaky Blinders, Birmingham, England, I would like to introduce you to Paddy Danda.
As the world becomes more automated and the robots take over, it's imperative that we build the right human skills for the future. So pull up a chair, grab a samosa or two, and make yourself very uncomfortable. So Jamie, thank you so much for joining me today. I am super excited because I just discovered you recently. So I'm so glad I did. And my first question is, what superpower would you like to bring to this particular episode?
Well, can I bring two that are related? Because I don't think you can have one without the other.
Yeah, go for it.
I think all my work that I've ever done when it comes to exploring the internet and its culture is you got to be very curious. So curiosity, you got to be just fascinated by strange worlds and people's stories. And there's just an endless variety of those. You'll never get bored. So curiosity, but also openness. I think if you're really trying to get to grips with how people live online, you've got to be open to seeing the world the way they do a little bit. Like not just thinking everybody who you disagree with is a moron or an idiot or doesn't know what they're talking about. You've got to be open to seeing things through their eyes. And that's just a good thing to do. But it's also important, I think, because you just learn and discover so much. It takes you sometimes to quite uncomfortable places, but you can get to grips with problems much better. For example, trying to explore eating disorder forums, pro-anorexia forums. You've got to try to see them through the eyes of a 14-year-old girl. You've got to try to be open to how they might engage with it and what benefits they might get from it and why. And because I think what we tend to do is we see these scary parts of the internet or these weird subcultures or whatever, and we just close our mind off to them, don't want to think about them, don't engage with them, think they're horrible. They're never how you think. They're always slightly different. And then you don't learn anything about them. So, yeah, curiosity and openness, they go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other.
Oh, I love that. I think looking back, as I was growing up, my parents came from India in the 1960s, early 70s. And it was really interesting because they were seen as aliens in that the people around them, the neighbors, had never experienced Indian people before. And my mum tells me stories of how she used to be cooking curry and she'd have to lock all the windows because if a neighbor complained about the smell, you'd have a police officer knocking on the door. And it was because people just didn't understand. And now I look at the age we live in and curry is like one of the most popular dishes in the UK. So it's taken time. But when I think those people that did get curious early on and really try to understand these foreign people that had come over, it really opened up huge opportunities, not for just us, but them as well. And it's changed the world completely. So yeah, I'm with you on that.
It's completely right, Paddy. I totally agree with you. we've got to also, I think among the sort of the liberals of the world, we'll all nod along with that story and say, that's fantastic. That's exactly what we should be open to that. It's good for everyone. We realize our misconceptions. And now try and do that for someone who's a member of the radical right movement. Try and do that for someone who's a drug dealer on the dark net. Try and do that for someone who's an internet troll. And you'll suddenly find that actually you don't really want to be very open. You don't really want to try and listen. You've got to do it with people that you really disagree with, that you really dislike. And so I think sometimes we might have a tendency to, we nod along and say, absolutely, it's all about openness. Okay, go and spend 6 months with Tommy Robinson and the English Defence League. Oh, I'm not going around with those idiots. Well, you might actually, it's not to say you'd agree with them. It's not to say that you think they were cool. You might understand what's motivating them, what's driving them, and then you just understand better what you might do about it. But I spent weeks and weeks following Tommy Robinson from the English Defence League around. I didn't come out of it thinking he was a great guy or that I thought he was right, but I did understand a bit better the motives of his supporters and why they're moving in that direction. So I think when it comes to curiosity and openness, you've got to push it to a place that maybe you feel a bit uncomfortable with if you really want to benefit from it. And I go back to the story of the forums that encourage eating disorders, pro-anorexia forums, which I spent weeks on these forums when I was writing my book about the darknet. They're so misunderstood, so misunderstood. Most of them are set up by women, young girls themselves, who've created a community, and they get sucked in because everyone's so nice and welcoming and friendly. But contained within that, they are pushing a very dangerous message about eating behavior. But you've got to get in there and try and understand it to know that. So I don't know why I just brought that anecdote up, but it was to say that curiosity isn't just for us great liberals who think it's wonderful and it's great to be open to everyone. Yeah, fine, I agree. Let's take it to the dark places too, because that's where you might find the most learning, if you like.
I'm actually really glad you just made that point, because I recently have had this fascination with cults. I've been watching a lot of documentaries about cults, not because I want to start a cult. It's because I'd love to get in that mindset of what do they do that gets people hooked?
Which ones have you watched recently?
Oh God, there's been loads, like Nexium, Jim Jones. There's been a few I can't even remember the names of.
I wrote a podcast about a cult called A Very British Cult. That's about speaking on your podcast, It's about a self-help group that started off being really dedicated to Stephen Covey's Secret 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, like a book reading group. And it was all about self-help and self-improvement, but actually really was behind all of that was essentially quite a standard cult. And I agree with you. They're so interesting. And I think when you study them, you waver between being angry at the people that are in it and feeling sorry for the people that are in it because they're victims. But they're often recruiting new people as well. And it's the same with OneCoin, the multi-level marketing Ponzi crypto scam that I did for the missing crypto queen. You feel sorry for some of the investors because they've obviously lost their money, but they're recruiting new investors as well. And they're trapped in this, the victim perpetrator. And when you find those things where you're a bit confused as to how you feel about it, I think that's always really good territory. It's opening up your mind a bit and making you think. And maybe that's why you're fascinated with cults, because you're not quite sure sometimes what you think about them. And it forces you to think interesting thoughts.
Yeah, and I see a lot of that going on in India. Like when I was a kid, my parents used to take me there every year, and like whenever anyone in the family had a medical problem or whatever, they'd be like, oh, go and see that guy. Like he's a guru, he's enlightened. And I used to go along. And as a kid, I'd be there not knowing any different, thinking this guy's like a miracle worker. And they'd be donating money. Like there's this whole setup. And I was always fascinated. It only occurred to me years later that maybe that was a cult and I just didn't know it. Right. But it is so easy to get sucked in, because when someone gives you that hope, it's incredible what that can do to people, isn't it?
The thing about cults is, I think if you look across a lot of different groups, and this includes internet-based groups, so whether it is the radical right English Defence League, or I also spent a load of time in one of my books with radical environmentalists, kind of Extinction Rebellion types, or whether it's pro-anorexia forums, or OneCoin investors, or cult members. What you cross all of them is they're often in there because of the community. They're in there because it's a social life. They're in there because they find people who are part of an exciting struggle, which gives them meaning. And you could almost pick someone out of the English Defence League and put them in a cult, or put them in Extinction Rebellion, or put them in a football hooligan group. And you will see that a lot of the mechanics are the same. They'll all wear the same clothes. They'll have the same hand gestures. They meet up every Saturday. And you stand back and you think, well, I see a lot of similarities here. People want to be part of a community. They want to be part of a movement. Sometimes that could be a really positive thing. Sometimes it could be really destructive. But I understand the urge for it, because sometimes modern life feels extremely empty and meaningless. and communities come in and take over. And you'd be amazed when I was part of internet forums, like researching trolling communities, internet trolling communities, same mechanism, part of a community. But we all troll strangers, but that is our community. And you find that everywhere, and it's fascinating.
And Jamie, when you were younger, say that kind of magical age of 10, 11, when we're like, in our minds, we can be anything. What did you want to be?
Well, the thing is, I came from quite a working class. I come North Kent, the Isle of Sheppey. People wouldn't, maybe a listener will know that. They'll know it's a pretty rundown place. My family didn't go to university. Brothers, sisters, mum, dad wasn't at university, but most of my friends wouldn't be going to university. So I didn't have great aspirations to be doing anything I'm doing now. I think I had an idea that maybe I could be like a bank manager or something, and that, because then I could have a nice car and a house and a mortgage and probably live near where I lived back then. But I did always have a real competitive urge to be the best at whatever I was trying to do. So I wanted to always win things. And I think that was because my dad never let me win anything. We'd play tennis when I was 10, and he'd just beat me 6-0, like he wouldn't even give me a chance. So became very competitive. I've got a brother who's almost exactly 1 year younger than me. And so we used to be very competitive. So I think but at school, I had no idea what I wanted to be, other than I wanted to get the best grades in the whole school, with no vision beyond that. and I managed to do that. So then I did something else, and I somehow ended up doing all of this. I had a sense that I wanted to get out of as I got older, the place where I grew up, I wanted to get out of it. You know, I'm really interested in why people are so confused as to why someone like Andrew Tate is popular. Because I know in my neighborhood where I grew up, he would have been popular. And again, it's about trying to understand why. Like, why is that? And I grew up in somewhere where everything was about being a real bloke, being the hardest bloke in school and all that stuff. I don't know why we have this problem here, but it's like back when I was 13, 14, all of the heroes were just the hard nuts, the local hard nuts. They were famous people in my neighborhood. Who was the hardest kid? And I just hated that. I wanted to get out of that world. And some of my friends, such smart people, getting expelled because they were getting into fights because they wanted to show that they were tougher than the next kid, and driving around like joyriding in cars and stuff. I just wanted to get away from that. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we've got in the whole country, by the way. We've got to figure this thing out. So I decided, well, if I can get the best grades in school, I could go to university, and then I'll go somewhere, and then I'll move somewhere else. And then I could keep trying hard and get better grades. And I don't know what I want to be. I had no idea what I wanted to be, just away from that. And that's really tough when you're a bloke. I think people sometimes don't realize how hard it is to be 14, 15, 16-year-old man or boy. Pressures you're under. Like the threat of violence everywhere in certain places, and I just was sick of it. I just hated it. So that was my motivating factor. Was when I was 10 or 11, it's a very different world to when you're 14, 15. And I just kept wanting to be good at stuff and going somewhere and doing something else. And that's how I weirdly ended up doing all this.
Again, I'm trying to connect with your stories, and there's such strong connections. So when I was around 10, I'd lived in Warwick, which lovely town. I call it the Harry Potter of movies. Like, it's got a castle, it's just so lovely, friendly. And then we moved to Birmingham.
And I bet there's pockets where it's rough on a Friday night in the town centre and you're 16 years old, milling around.
100%, I'm sure. We moved around the age of 10, 11 to Birmingham, which I say is the Jurassic Park of towns. It's like only the fittest survive. And the school that I went to was rough as hell. And it reminded me of that when you mentioned, like, everybody walked around wanting to pick a fight. And I came midway through my first year of high school. So by then, everyone had already made their little connections and their friendships, right?
That's tough.
And they see this fresh blood, and then they hear you're from Warwick and you've moved here, and you're just like prime suspect one. Like, everybody wants to fight you because they want to see where you fit on the league table. Luckily, I had made some cool friends that would always be there on hand to intervene. But if I hadn't made those friends, I'm pretty sure I would have beaten up as well.
Your great skill sets, if you went to a normal school, and it sounds like your school was a very typical school, you have to learn social skills and where you are in the pecking order and how to keep certain people happy with which group are you going to try and affiliate yourself to. And these are really important skills to learn. And I still credit my ability to, like I said, I've gone around to so many different groups in my life and tried and just hung out with them and studied them and written about them. Some of them would be considered to be pretty nasty. And I credit going to quite a rough school, making that possible for me to do that because of all the social skills you've got to pick up. You've got to be able to talk to everyone and work things out. So I figure what you say about Birmingham, only the fittest, but you learn things that sort of help you through life.
Yeah, I think there should be a book, which is like how to be more streetwise in a corporate world, because that would be cool, I think, just bringing those skills into that world. So you mentioned there about being in some fairly dangerous situations. What's been one of the most dangerous situations you've ended up in terms of the work that you do? Because you've met some really dark people, like everything I've been listening to on the Missing Crypto Queen. There are some real dangerous moments, even in that podcast.
Yeah, there's different types of danger. There are war journalists who go to places that are way more dangerous than anything I ever do. But I think you've got to separate the sort of the actual danger to your perception of danger. So with the Missing Crypto Queen, there's an underlying, I don't want to give all the story away, but there's an underlying background noise, which is organized crime. So this is a gigantic Ponzi scheme, multi-billion-dollar Ponzi scheme. Inevitably, it drew in organized criminals who we think were probably using the OneCoin scam to launder money, stuff like this stuff going on. And you know that investigating it is going to put you at risk, but you can't see or you can't feel the threat. You don't really know where it could come from. And it makes you very nervous. It makes you quite paranoid. You walk around the street and you see someone acting suspiciously, which happens all the time. And you start getting it into your head that maybe you're being followed, or you have to have a lot of security briefing done. You have to have a lot of security checks done on you, which I have to have done all the time. And it just makes you very paranoid. It makes you very worried. And you also get worried about lawyers when you're a journalist. If you're investigating things or exposing things, one of the threats is legal letters turning up saying that you've libeled my client. And that can silence you and that can worry you, and you get worried about being made bankrupt and all the rest of it. So sometimes the fear and the worry, it's not like there's people screaming at you in the street, but in your head, you're constantly slightly scared of what could happen. And I find that hardest to deal with because you don't really know whether you're being paranoid or not. I have at the same time I don't want to keep going on about Tommy Robinson because this was a while ago. But when I was following him around for weeks and weeks, we went one time, I remember well, we went to Denmark, me, him, and a couple of other people to be at a big protest in Denmark. And I was with him the whole time, and we were getting bottles thrown at us, chased around in taxis. People found the hotel he was in, and I was in a couple of rooms down from him. They were turning up, trying to get in to try and beat him up. Yeah, I think he might have been wearing a bulletproof vest, if I remember correctly. So just the proximity to him there was quite a lot of physical violence being directed at me as well. But the thing that I found with all of this work, and this is also true of internet research. You have to be in those physical locations. Like, to be somewhere, you get a very different perspective on it, as if you're just, compared to you just writing about it or reading about it online. So when I'm researching the OneCoin scam, how people fall for it and why they fall for it and what hopes and aspirations people had who were putting money into this fake cryptocurrency, yes, I could have interviewed them over Zoom and I could have got the words out of their mouths. But to see them in their homes, to see how they react and their body language and how they talk to you and the little habits they have and what their street's like and that kind of thing, you get a very different perception on stuff, and it gives you new ideas and fresh ways of telling the story. Like, there was one book guy I interviewed for my book, The Darknet, who was an extremely aggressive internet troll. Frankly, quite a racist, nasty, homophobic, just everything in one word. It's just the nastiest stuff he was putting online. And I said, I want to come and meet you in person in your town. I'll come and talk to you. After a lot of persuasion, he agreed to meet me in person in this small town up near Leeds. And the sweetest, gentlest guy in person. And like this really depressing town, there was nothing going on. All the shops were boarded up. And I thought, he finds meaning and power and strength in his online persona. Like, online, he's infamous. He's notorious. People look up to him. They're scared of him. In his town, he's nobody, and there's nothing's happening. Nothing's going on. And it was like, again, I'm not trying to excuse his behavior for a second, but being there in person and seeing his surroundings gave me a very different way of thinking about him and what he was doing. And that is one piece of advice I always give to anyone who's doing any research or doing any writing, interviewing someone. Go there, like physically go and meet them. I promise you, on the train journey back, a spark will fly in your head and it will give you a totally new idea. And I found that, and it also gives you credibility when talking about, like, when I talk to you about this internet troll, when I say I met him and I hung out with him and I spent all day walking around his town talking about the shops, I've got credibility talking about him as a person in a way that I wouldn't have if I just chatted to him on Messenger. So this is a superpower in a way. It's about getting there physically when you're doing your work and trying to understand problems. It's not just that you get fresh material, you get fresh ideas as well.
I was going to say, in the Missing Crypto Queen, you traveled all over. Like, Uganda was a really memorable episode, because you could almost put yourself there through the kind of the words that you were saying and the sounds you could hear and all that background noise. It was truly immersive. I just love the fact that you were there and really experiencing it.
Yeah, and I think when we went to Uganda, you're trying to picture the story, because I suppose what I was trying to show there is just what's the bottom of this giant OneCoin scam was a pyramid scheme. And what's at the bottom of that pyramid? I know all about the top, Dr. Ruja Ignatova and her Bentleys and Porsches and 10,000 people at Wembley Stadium and stuff, Wembley Arena rather. But what's at the bottom, and what's life like at the very bottom of that? And when we went to Uganda, you always discover something new when you go to a place as well. So we went to this guy's, Daniel. He'd invested 5,000 euros into OneCoin, which is all of his family's money.
And 2 goats as well, didn't he?
He sold his goats, and he got his mum to invest her life savings. And this woman had been picking plantain all her life, saving up so she could open a maize store. They invested it in OneCoin instead. And you go to her house and you realize there's this family that's still hoping they're going to get rich through this scam. And I didn't even know that it was a scam. I had to tell them, which was a really interesting and unusual scene. And when you're making podcasts, you're trying to find moments. You're trying to find moments that will mean something to everybody. But going to Daniel's village, we suddenly realized everyone here knows about OneCoin. Everyone we spoke to knew Dr. Ruja and knew OneCoin more than they knew Bitcoin. And we're like, oh my God, this scam has just got its like tentacles all across the world into these tiny villages. It's just spread through word of mouth, the dream of getting rich, destroying lives everywhere. Only going there in person can you really understand that.
Yeah, that was a real emotional episode. I remember when he asked you to tell his mother about what was going on, and you were like, I can't just tell her. Do you want me to tell her the truth? Like, what do you want me to tell her? This is your mother here, because he hadn't told her.
Yeah, one of the strangest things I've ever done as a journalist. But I've realized over the years that when you interview people about the difficult things that have happened in their life, it's a kind of, for them, it can be a form of therapy. It's their chance to tell someone. And sometimes they're telling you, the journalist, but they're trying to tell other people in their family what's happened or open up. And they use you as an excuse to do that. And in this case, I understand exactly what had happened. Daniel had invested his mother's money, but he hadn't been able to tell her that it was a scam. He kept saying, maybe he knew it was, but he kept saying, well, maybe it's, they're telling me there's problems and there's delays. And I think he used us at the BBC as a kind of an excuse that we could break the news to her because he couldn't do it. And at that point, you're not really a journalist, you're just a person. And I'm thinking, I want to help this guy. So I had to just say, I'm afraid. He said, there's these people from the BBC who are here to tell you some news about OneCoin, Mum. And that's not why we were there at all. But I thought, sometimes if I can help him, I will. So I said, yeah, I'm afraid. I think it's looking like maybe a scam. I don't think you're going to get your money back. I'm so sorry. And Daniel had to act a bit shocked and surprised as well. He was translating it to her. And I knew I was being used, but I thought, it doesn't matter, does it really? Who cares about the BBC's impartiality? Not impartiality, but whether that's the correct role for a journalist. We shouldn't really be interfering in people's lives. But sometimes you're just a person in a position. Mm-hmm. And the good thing about podcasts is that you have the chance to explain yourself and talk about that. Whereas if that was a little news package, you wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah. And Jamie, if we rewind to when you first got interested in that story, like what drove you to pursue it? Because as we know now, there's like a Channel 4 documentary that's about to be released. Your podcast is absolutely amazing. So many people like that I meet are talking about it. But at that moment early on, what got you hooked and what made you think this is worth pursuing?
It was in 2018 I first heard about it, and the BBC producer, Georgia, who's on the podcast all the way through.
I love Georgia, by the way. She's super cool.
Yeah. So she gets in touch with me and says she'd read my book, The Darknet. And there was a lot in there about Bitcoin. And she said, you know about all these cryptocurrencies. Well, I've just been pitched a cryptocurrency at a dinner party called OneCoin, and apparently it's the second or third biggest cryptocurrency in the world. And I said, I don't think it is, because I've never even heard of this thing. And she said, no, they're saying it's bigger, it's the next Bitcoin, but the woman the woman's missing, the boss is missing. And I've had a little look at some of their marketing material, and it looks really suspicious. Would you like to investigate with me? I thought, I can have a little look. No, I sort of realized it was a multi-level marketing, like Herbalife or Tupperware. It was a multi-level marketing company. But they were using a cryptocurrency as the bait, really. And that was the product, was a fake cryptocurrency on the top of a pyramid scheme, essentially. And I thought, wow, these scammers are so smart. You invent Bitcoin, 5 minutes later, a scammer has invented a pyramid scheme with a fake Bitcoin as the product. That's how good they are. And I thought, it just sounds brilliant. It's such a wild story. I can tell already it's going to be great. I had no idea that I'd still be doing it 6 years later, or that the woman would still be missing and would now be on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list, where there is a reward of $5 million for information leading to her arrest. So she's the world's most wanted woman. Had no idea. I kind of thought we might find her. The reason the BBC took this on, I think, is because a lot of British people were investing in crypto assets around that time, 2018, 2019. They still are. And they did not and do not understand them. They don't understand how they work. They don't understand the risks involved. They can't tell a legitimate product from a scam product. But they're all getting sucked into this promise of getting rich very quickly. There are a lot of podcasts about cryptocurrencies, and they are nearly all for people who understand cryptocurrencies. They're technical, they're boring, they're about hash rates, encryption models, like specific blockchain types, issuance, really complicated stuff. For most people who hold crypto assets, they don't care about that. They don't understand it. So we were thinking, well, a podcast that can teach people about crypto and the risks of scams told through a story of a hunt for a missing woman will get ordinary people engaged. And if just a few of them at the next dinner party, when they're pitched another crypto scam, say, oh, I heard a podcast about something like this, and it just means they're less likely to lose their money, we thought, brilliant. It's the perfect story. That was the thinking, really, like reaching ordinary people who don't understand tech, but who need to understand something about it through a story, because stories are the way we learn and remember everything. And I suppose has always been my mission with technology, trying to explain it all to non-technical people.
And talking about reaching everyday people, I was explaining to you just before we kicked off how during the school run, I've often got the podcast on in the car. And when I'm picking up my daughter who's 15, she'll be just glued and hooked. I think she's on her phone because she's got a phone like this. And then she'll just ask me a question, go, Dad, like, did that just happen? Or she's been listening to you, but she's just been fiddling on her phone. And I'm like, she's actually listening.
Maybe she's Googling the latest developments on the story.
Yeah. And my son's the same because he gets snippets of the odd episode as well. And he's only 12. And he'll ask me stuff like, so what happened next? Well, what was the next episode about? And it's just remarkable.
That's great. That's great. And I've often hoped that younger people would enjoy that podcast. And I do get that quite a lot of people saying my kids seem to really enjoy it, which is good because the BBC are always trying to keep younger people interested in the things they make. And I think the BBC sometimes makes the mistake of thinking young audiences only want to hear from celebrities and other young people. But I don't think that's true. I think they just want to hear really good, like gripping, exciting stories told in a good way, good music, well produced. You know, they're used to high quality products as well, you know, and you can do that. You can do that with these stories. So I'm pleased about that. That's good news. Tell your kids that we're still on the story.
Oh, awesome. And actually brings me to kind of my penultimate question, which was, if you do get to meet Dr. Ruja, what would you say to her? Like, what are the things that you would love to tell her?
I used to think it would be me. I think the FBI first dollars reward. The BBC will offer you a thank you for getting in touch. So the things I would like to know, whether it's me asking her or the authorities asking her, I think everyone has the same two questions really. And the first is, did she design it to ever become this big? My theory is that she started off thinking it would be a $10 million, roughly, ICO scam, which for those who are interested in crypto, initial coin offerings are the way you bring in early investment. It's like an IPO when you're selling shares and stuff, except it's not really very well regulated. Back then, especially when she started, investors into crypto were putting money into into buying coins before they were fully issued. The inventors of the crypto would make all kind of wild promises about what would happen and what happened with the price and the product. It would all collapse. Investors would lose their money. The creators would have made a bit of money, and they'd all say, "We're so sorry. It was a risky venture. Never mind. Your money's gone. And by the way, I've now moved to Singapore or Dubai or whatever." I think that's what she thought would happen, and she would have got away with it. But it grew so quickly because it was so successful and the timing was perfect that it turned into a multi-billion scam, by which point she was kind of stuck. It was too big to run away from. So that's question number one. And the second question, slightly more niche, is probably at what point did organized crime get involved? Because I think she started this again to be a small scam, and then organized criminals saw how successful it was and how convenient it would be as a vehicle to launder money and forced her to do it for them. And other people think it started off from day one as a kind of clever organized crime thing. I don't think that's true. So I'd love to know that. And then there's the obvious thing of like, just please talk me through how the hell you've managed to stay under the radar since 2017, because that is incredible. Hardly anyone can do that. What's the trick? What did you do? Where did you go? Who, all those questions about just how she managed practically to live for however many years without being caught.
Wow. And it was, I heard something between 10 to 15 billion was the fraud number eventually, but some people quote 5 billion.
$10 to $15 billion number came from me. The official number that the FBI uses is based on internal accounting documents that are incomplete, which gives a number of around 4 to 5 billion euros. A lot of the money was actually from China. It carried on even after those accounting documents stopped. It's still going on today, in fact, albeit at a much smaller scale. So some people, including one of the very, very top promoters, has said it's up to $15 billion. And of course, journalists always like to use the biggest number because it's the most exciting number, but we don't really know for sure. We can't be certain about that. So somewhere between $4 and $15 billion is a good guess.
And Jamie, I know we're fast approaching time and I know you're super busy. So my last question is, one of my favorite questions I ask every guest is, if I could give you any superpower to abolish something in the world of work, what would that be?
Abolish something in the world of work? What other answers have people given?
Well, mine's a silly one. I would abolish pineapple pizza.
Oh God, no, I really don't know because I'm freelance. I don't have to worry about these things. Good thing I get to do is I just kind of ignore meetings that I don't need to, and I can control my own time so well. And I would hate to be caught up in a big hierarchy. Things I've noticed, like here's an example, and I don't want to insult the BBC because it's a brilliant place to work. One of the problems the BBC has, which I think everywhere has, is that as you get closer to transmission date of a big project, more and more people higher and higher and higher up start getting involved because everyone gets nervous and worried and anxious. And it just means that you have more and more work to do as you approach deadline, which is the last time you want to be focusing on media and output and thinking like that. And like the number of people that suddenly appear out of nowhere that I've never even met getting involved in projects as we get closer to the deadline. It's like, what's going on, guys? It's very top heavy because people get very nervous about things. If there's any way of trying to abolish some of this like unnecessary involvement from people up on high, it makes for a much more, in my line of work, we can just get so much more done so quickly. Like the missing crypto queen was me and Georgia, 2 people. That was it. We didn't need more people than that. There's a tendency to pile more and more senior people into things, but oftentimes that doesn't really work. It slows everything down. I don't really know what the word for that is. And I'm sure there's a lot of management theory about agile teams and, spoken hub and all sorts of things. But I don't really know what words to use to describe it, but that is just my experience.
I lied. Can I ask one more question before we wrap up?
Yeah.
Just following on from that. How do you and Georgia make decisions together? Because you've got 2 people. You can't go, well, who votes? Because you're both 50-50. So what's that process look like?
The good thing about making a podcast, and I think this should hopefully apply to making big decisions in companies and everything. Good thing about making a podcast is if we are in any kind of disagreement, we will probably record the disagreement, discuss the disagreement as an episode of the podcast, show the people how we're trying to think about it, not make it a really negative thing, not make it a problem. Just try to, I really try to document and record the way that we're making this stuff, the way we're making our products, because it just gets people interested in and invested in and feel like they're part of the podcast. So disagreements have never felt like they're a problem, but there's something that you can lead into and talk about, and then they just kind of resolve themselves somehow. We might have little tiny disagreements about the ordering of or a placement of a sentence or something like that. And then it's just like one of us gives in. I think the reason we don't disagree too much is because I trust her and know how good she is, trust her judgment, and I know that she cares as much as I do about the product. So I know I'm a good arguing with someone who has a very, very legitimate argument and cares the same way I do about it. So it's not gonna be an argument because I don't think she's thought about it. It's not good. And often arguments actually come to that. Arguments that are about one small thing are actually, I know more than you do. No, you don't. You haven't put in as much time as I have. And we don't have any of that. So if she feels really strongly about it, I tend to say, I trust you and I know how much you care about this. You know things I don't about making podcasts. Do you feel that strongly? Let's do it that way. So I think disagreements, they're often not really about the thing you're disagreeing with. And if you've got a great team together who trust each other and you know everyone's coming from the right place, you find that disagreements are resolved really easily.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. Is there another episode in the making?
What are you up to?
I've finished all the ones that are out there at the moment.
That's like 30. God, what? I don't even know how many days.
It's about 13 hours of my life I've listened to you. Yes.
I think it's 12 episodes, isn't it?
Is it 12? Yeah, that's probably more like.
I think that's right. I mean, I'm losing track of how many episodes I've done. Yeah, the thing about the Missing Crypto Queen is that after the initial 8 episodes, we've only put out another 3 or 4 or whatever it is in the last 4 years, because we only want to put one out when it feels like there's something new to say. I don't want to keep churning them out. I could have done 10 more episodes, but it wouldn't have really gone anywhere. I only want to put something out if there's something really great we need to share with you. And with this kind of story, that can take months. I can't work on it all the time because I've got to pay the bills and stuff. But there'll be a development and we'll say, go, right, next 6 weeks, let's work on this because something's happened. And I can't always predict when that will be. So to me, it feels like it's an open brief. We're always working on it in one way. We have a Crypto Queen email address. I get messages constantly from people. We're always there, waiting, listening, ready, keeping an eye on everything. We'll only start making a new episode when something has come up that deserves basically another hour of your time.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, I can't even imagine how that must work out for you, but I am looking eagerly to the next one. So thank you so much, Jamie. I just want to thank you for your time once again. Like I said, you're a super busy guy and really appreciate you taking the time out today. And I'm sure listeners will absolutely appreciate some of those behind the scenes sort of insights that you've given today, because we obviously don't always see that. So thank you so much.
That's all right. And my general theory, what I always try to do is to tell people really how it is behind the scenes, because I think that's what people want. We're consuming content all the time now, but you want to know, how's it made? Or what decisions are you taking? What the challenges you're facing? I want to understand what I'm hearing. They don't just want the retelling. They want to know the little bits to help them feel they really got a new insight on it. And that's just part of our new transparent world. So I think that, again, in terms of wider lessons for superpowers, I think just openness and transparency about even all the ugly stuff. People really want it. People really value it.
It's the end of another episode. Thank you so much for listening. Please do connect with me via LinkedIn and drop me a message and let me know your favorite takeaways from the episode. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Superpower School newsletter so that you can be notified of all future episodes. Simply visit the website www.superpowers.school. Thank you once again.